everybody to our April webinar hosted by ACS New South Wales. I'm Alana Huffnance, I'm the New South Wales State Manager, and I'm really excited to bring this particular topic to you. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet. For me, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. If you would like to put into the chat, if you know of the traditional owners of the land in which you are coming to us from, please do so. I'd like to extend our respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and I'd like to also pay that respect to any First Nations that are on the call with us today. A little bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is going to be running for about 40 minutes. At the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. I ask that you put the questions into the chat. You can do that at any time, and I will moderate the Q&A at the end. If you are wanting to include your CPD points for this particular attendance at this event, we ask that you stay on for the whole hour to be eligible for those CPD points. So today we're very excited to bring our PPP partner Auticon to this webinar. I guess to frame it up from an ACS perspective, the Digital Pulse report from 2024 suggested that while there's 1 million tech workers currently working in Australia, by 2030, we'll need 1.3 million. So this is an additional 52,000 tech workers per year. And at the moment, we're really not in a position to meet industry demand for tech workers in Australia. And this is why we need to be considering all different types of talent pipelines and tapping them in, one of which is a pipeline of neurodiverse talent. So our PPP Auticon is an international information technology consultancy firm that exclusively employs autistic adults as IT consultants. I'll now hand over to Ivonne from Auticon, and she can give some more information about Auticon and start our presentation for today.
Thank you, Alana. Hello, everyone. Now, let me run you through Auticon, what we do, and give you like a quick overview. Now, imagine a world where we unlock the real potential of our population. Imagine where innovation, diverse thinking are at the center of everything we do. Now, we at Auticon, we're engaging workplaces to make this vision a reality. However, there is still a lot of work to do. Auticon is the world's largest autistic majority company, and we are a global leader in neurodiverse employment and also in IT consulting. Over 80% of our employees are on the autism spectrum. We operate in 15 countries, and we deliver over 300 IT consulting projects annually. What we do is we help companies embrace neurodiversity by integrating autistic IT talent into their organizations, so that they can embrace their unique capabilities, which are sustained focus and concentration, out-of-the-box thinking, a different approach to problem solving, and many others, just to name a few. Now, we work across several domains, which are software development, data analytics, quality assurance, cybersecurity, and also spatial analytics. In business, what we need to understand is the value of neurodiverse talent and embrace their potential. Currently, only 29% of autistic adults are in full-time employment, despite their exceptional skills. Embracing neurodiversity at work. So let me start with you, Patrick. I know that you have been working with us at Auticon for a while. Now, tell us what prompted you to enhance neurodiversity in your team, and also why did you initially engage us as a service provider?
Yeah, okay. So I think for the people on the call, so the reason that I engaged with Auticon was for a personal reason. And it's because I had a friend who has an autistic son who was leaving school. And I'd been working with him to help him in interview processes to get jobs. And I understood the struggle of his parents in that scenario. And I had a conversation with Bodo Mann, who's managing director of Auticon, in relation to this. And in my world, so I'm the director of infrastructure, cloud and operations and digital workplace at BUPA. And at Woolworths, I was looking after the a large operational group as well. And the skills that I need in operational spaces are ability to process and look after some very complicated sort of data scenarios in relation to configuration and management of our environments. So I just had the conversation and took the opportunity to work with Auticon to see if we could find the right fit for candidates. And the conversations that we had were around the outcomes. Okay, yep. Very, very specifically, this was not done as a favor. It was not done out of being nice. It was done out of pragmatism for being able to deliver what we needed to deliver. So we had the conversations, we started the engagements, and also we had our eyes open in terms of what we need to do. We need to be very conscious and aware and pragmatic, and we just proceeded. And that relationship with Auticon probably started, I think, 5 or 6 years ago.
Yep, it did.
So, and the people that work with us are still working. Some are in new roles, some are in existing roles. We've cycled through people, and we've also initiated a program at BUPA with Auticon in the same space. So that's how it grew with me.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight, Patrick. David, we're also working with you and in the cybersecurity space. And you came across Auticon in a very different way, because I believe you stumbled upon the strengths of neurodiverse people when looking at the work with Scotland Yard, how they solve crimes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Yvonne. Hello, everyone. I'm David. I work for a shopping center business. As you guys can see, I'm actually inside a shopping centers right now. I'll step back a little bit, right, in terms of how the whole journey started, all right? I remember it was actually during a very interesting time in Australia. We go back to almost 2 years ago. That's when the Optus hack happening, right? And also the Medibank breach happens, right? There was all of a sudden there's a huge awareness within the industries about we need a cybersecurity talents. And I'm sure Pat probably been through a very similar space, right? About that all of a sudden they're just not, everybody's hiring, right? And then there's just not enough talent in the pool. And the Auticon was actually introduced to me by our human resource. And I just thought, right, like, it's pretty hard to find people at the moment. Yeah, let me do some research. And I actually come across these articles. It's actually a research paper published by Scotland Yard about, through their research, right, and most of the high-profile cyber criminals are actually neurodiverse. And they actually started an initiative, right, about how about let's identify the talent in the neurodiverse. Let's give them an opportunity to use the talent on the good side, right? So therefore, like they started that initiative. And when I read the articles, I was like, yeah, I can do that, right? So therefore, that's kind of like how the journey began. Right, yeah. and of course, like with Auticon support, right, like we identified the talents, and it has been exceptional. I guess like this I like to share.
Thank you. No, thank you, David. That's fantastic. So I now move on to Meredith, and Meredith works for Auticon. She's our lead Neuro-Inclusion Specialist. And Meredith, I want to ask you, because you work very closely with our clients to successfully integrate neurodiverse people into the workplace. Now, what are some of the most common questions you get from clients? And also, are there any myths that you want to bust?
Thanks, Yvonne, and hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. Yeah, I'm going to go to the myth busting first, Yvonne, because there's a few myths that we like to bust during our knowledge transfer and training sessions that we do with our clients, and also many other interested corporates. So there's myths like, autism, we bust the myth that autism is a linear spectrum. It's not a linear spectrum. It's kind of three-dimensional and quite dynamic. Autism's not an intellectual disability. It's not a mental health condition. But one of the most common myths that we like to bust really is that there's kind of this saying that floats around that people say, well, we're all somewhere on the spectrum, and that's not actually true. And I think people say that, or they think that because, they want to be inclusive and supportive, but the behaviours of people on the autism spectrum are just everyday human behaviours. But what's different is that, it might be a difference in the frequency or the intensity. So that's one of the myths that we, like to bust during the training. In terms of common questions, we get lots of questions as well during training sessions. A question which actually came up just this week during a lunch and learn program or sessions that we're running with a corporate in New Zealand was really around, is a client-facing type of role something that autistic people should be in? And it's a really interesting question. You think about social communication, social interaction is part of the core features of autism. And, so you might think that, hey, people shouldn't be in client-facing or in those kinds of roles where there's lots of interaction and dealing with people and managing people. But autism's a spectrum, and everyone's areas of strength and everyone's areas of, where they require support is different. So therefore, it's really about the individual. And if you think about people on the spectrum like Hannah Gadsby and Chris Morgan and Scott Miller, they're all using their strengths and their talents to have very successful careers. So, you're getting into the area of, job carving. So why not focus on an individual's strength? If it's social interaction and if they really thrive and they're energized by that kind of role, why shouldn't they be in a client-facing or that kind of role? But if not, then another area may be more suitable.
Right, Meredith. I think you have enlightened us a bit more on the subject now. Thank you. David, I would like to know when your team was working with our IT consultants, did it enhance your team's approach to problem solving? And can working on the diversity of your team, could that unlock more innovation? Like, could you see a difference there, or a different approach, a different way to look at it?
Okay, that's a very good question. I'm just thinking back right at the beginning of the journey, right?
Yes.
All I remember, right, it's been almost 2 years now, right? Like, all I remember, I was actually very stressed. Right? and then because right, like I want to make sure the journey for the talent is pleasant, right?
Yeah.
So I get into a zone of like doing tons of research, right, and then to try to be aware of like what to do, what not to do, and
but
again, right, at the same, yes.
Yeah. But you also had support from us, right?
That's why I was about to mention that, right?
Yes.
That's why I was about to mention that, right? And with Auticon support, right, and it's actually really helped us to, when I say us, just not just myself and also my team, to really learn about, right, how to work with neurodiverse talents. And in fact, right, I actually felt, nothing back, right, that I think my nervousness kind of translate to the team and somehow kind of make them all aware of like the way you want to do the right thing to make sure the talent actually felt comfortable, right? Okay. And like before, right, I actually realized like throughout the whole process, right, like we actually brought the team closer. Mm-hmm. We actually brought the team closer, right? I like to say that's actually one of the sort of like the unseen benefit, right, or indirect, like I didn't realize that, right? And also at the same time, right, I felt each of us at Vicinity, we get a new skill sets. We get a new skills. And that skill set is actually how to be, I know the word inclusive can be very generic, right? But we learn how to work closer, right? And also learn how to, I don't want to use, I'm trying to think of the right terminology, right? Like we learn try to we learned how to work with people on neurodiverse, right? And then through that process, right, I really think we actually unlock a different potential of the type of skill sets, the knowledge, right? And then the talent, right, we can actually bring into our cybersecurity operations.
So are you less nervous now, David?
Oh yeah, 100%. Not nervous at all. Not nervous at all now. And I'm actually looking forward to do more. Okay, no, that's excellent. So and that's I guess that's also what Meredith and her team do by the autism awareness training sessions is taking away that fear of what is it like to work with someone who is on the spectrum, and yeah, I think that the other things were like that I've through the journey, right, I also learned, right, is that for example, right, in cybersecurity, many of us will require to stay focused at times, right? For example, right, if anything abnormal happens and all that, right, like you need to be able to spot that. And I'm actually complete opposite of that. I'm actually having trouble focusing, right? So and my wife think I'm neurodiverse in a different way. But anyway, but the neurodiverse talent really bringing that skill sets coming in, right? Like we started with packaging the work with something super complex, right? Sort of like the type of work, sort of almost like looking for a needle in a haystack, that type of work, right? And then the result was exceptional. And then the initial work was actually more about cleaned up. And then we quickly start moving to more about let's look for things that are not right in the environments, right? And then that engineers are superstars now. Right, it's just because of the ability to detect, right? But anyway,
yeah, no, great. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you, David. Patrick, I have a question for you. So, in your experience, do you think that workplaces building a capability in employing neurodiverse people will go some way in bridging the IT skills gap? And would you see developing this skill as something that is like highly valuable to Australian organizations? So in other words, do we need to embrace neurodiversity more?
So we do, but I want to do a callback to something that Meredith said.
Yes.
And that is that I only recruit people based on their ability and strengths. And so there's always, when you're in the interviews, there's the ubiquitous question of what your weakness is.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter because I'm not hiring people based on their weaknesses. I'm typically hiring people specifically for their skills and their strengths. And then in the context of the experience of a workplace and skills gaps, talent, and for the people on the call, in my observation of the Australian marketplace in terms of talent, there's two bits that you need. One is you can teach people skills. So a lot of my engineers reskill in different areas of engineering so they can move from network to cloud to wherever. Capability is very, very important for me, and so is fit in terms of values as well. My experience of working with neurodivergent employees in the workspace and having a workspace which is configured to work and be aware of the neurodiversity, the tools that you use to manage neurodiverse employees are actually very, very useful tools for all employees. And my view is I've probably got more out of employing and going through this process than anybody that I've employed, and so have my people, because the types of things that you look at in terms of your reflections on yourself is, what are the environments and habits that make you a good employee? What are the triggers that make you a stressed employee? What are the patterns and environments that allow you to work well and not work well? Is it in the office? Is it an engineering space? Is it in an open space? Is it in a social space? Is it at home? I have a lot of people that are neurodivergent that should reflect on those things for themselves and to understand that. So going through the process with Auticon makes my people better. And the people that come to work for me from Auticon are talented and they fill specific gaps. In honesty, they're not big skills gaps. So the skills gaps that we've got aren't being filled by Auticon, but I've got talent needs that are filled brilliantly by Auticon. My skills gaps are ServiceNow, AI, data science.
Yeah.
Those are the skills gaps. The other work where I've got Auticon working for me is in configuration management spaces. We have them doing engineering in the digital workplace spaces. I've had them doing reporting analytics in other spaces. For me, it's just another, to the point, it's another pipeline of talent that you can bring in. And then the other piece that's very important for me, and it's a values piece, and we spoke about this in our pre-chat, is that our workforce should represent our society.
Yes.
And that's beholden on us as employers and leaders to enable that. And this is one way that we should do that. And we shouldn't do that because of quota. We shouldn't do that because it's virtuous. We actually have to do that because having a workforce which represents the community that you come from is actually a very strong workforce. It has diversity of thought. It has diversity of talent. You converge in opinion. You don't, when everyone's the same, the answer's always the same. You never come up with the right solutions. And when you talk about innovation, for me, innovation is incremental, but innovation occurs when you have diversity of perspectives and views and everyone has a voice. And that, for me, the ability to be able to create an environment that is positive for neurodiverse employees creates a very positive environment for us to be able to actually function as a broader team as well. And that's where I see the value in this.
Yes, great, Patrick. And thank you. And this is a fantastic segue into my next question for Meredith, because you've already talked about tools and universal design. So Meredith, can you talk us through some just basic things any company can implement at a low cost to make the workplace more attractive for neurodiverse people?
Thanks, Ivonne. And yeah, look, I was going to mention universal design. You've stolen my thunder, so that's great. And universal design, for those that may not have heard the term before, is about designing things, whether it's a building or a workspace, with those with the greatest need in mind, and therefore you will also be supporting those with fewer support needs as well. So it's helpful and supportive for everyone. But adjustments in the workplace, look, things like flexible schedules, quiet working spaces, alternative communication methods. One of the key things like written instructions is really, really beneficial for neurodivergent people and a lot of our autistic colleagues, and helpful for everyone. So, but if you think of best practice, with a meeting, for example, setting up a meeting in advance, using a calendar invite. What about an agenda? Reduce, uncertainty. People know what's going to happen during the meeting. They've got an agenda. Follow up the meeting with notes and minutes. What are the actions and outcomes from a meeting? Who's responsible for those? What's the deadline that it needs to be achieved by? Those kinds of things. They're best practice. They are very good strategies and supports for neurodivergent people as well as for everybody else.
Meredith, can I say something on that?
Yes.
If you work in a regulated environment, what you just said is music to my ears. Standard operating procedures, quality, closed loops, audit trails, compliance, CPS 230, APRA, auditors coming in, all of the things you just described. I do not see those as assistance for neurodiverse people. I see that as very good business.
Yep.
And I think that when you bring that to us, you make us better, because people, their stuff goes to the side, and in my industry that has to be front and center.
Yep. No, that's right. That's good that we're all in agreement with that, Patrick. And there's some very basic things that any organisation can implement. That's supportive of neurodivergent talent and everybody, as Patrick's just confirmed. So.
Yeah, but if you think about it, just all of us here in the audience and here presenting, who does agendas for their meetings regularly? And good.
And I'm not neurodiverse. I'm just thorough.
And who does follow up? A follow-up message on this is what we've discussed. This is what this. It takes also discipline to do that. right?
But these are lots of things, and they're the types of things, Ivonne, that we cover in our training. And when, corporates reach out to us and say, look, we've got a challenge here with, a particular team member, and we will have a conversation about, specific things that might be going on, and think about a whole, range of areas where some sort of support strategies and adjustments might be made. So.
And you actually do that, right, Meredith? You go into workplaces and do workplace adjustment and
well, we do a physical, like when we had members starting in Patrick's team, in Melbourne, we will go on site with the team members. We look at the environment, we take into consideration sensory considerations and profiles of individuals, those kinds of things. And, obviously providing training and support for the, BUPA staff in Patrick's case, and in David's case, his team members there, which it's all part and parcel, and it's the support for the individual from a non-technical perspective, so from employability skills and from soft skills, is integral to what we do, and integral also to providing positive outcomes for people and for the organisations that they're working with.
Any other comments on this, Patrick?
No, I think the work that you do, Meredith, and I think it leaves quite an indelible impression on some of your candidates as well. And I've seen them progress to become very independent. And I think the other thing that surprised me is the level of self-awareness and the application of those tools for the individuals. So I've had conversations with people who want to be in the office because they prefer the context for focus. We understand, and again, for anybody on the call that is working with a hybrid workforce, you will notice that people's behavior changes based on their physical location and the level of attendance and socialization and context. So just observing how self-aware people are around their context, it made me reflect on, which environments help me work best, and the times, and not in a sort of a trying to change everything that I do, but just makes you reflect on those things as well. And that's my point. It's these tools and this, having an awareness of that actually makes you a better leader. It gives you a better environment. It gives you better engagement with your employees. It gives you another perspective, which just adds to your toolkit as a leader.
Yeah. And we've had some great outcomes for individuals. Obviously they've been employed or underemployed prior to joining us and working on, in, for instance, David's team or Patrick's team, they're earning an income. We've seen a number of our team members who then are able to move out of home, purchase their own homes, independent. We're empowering people because, we're not wanting to just have people be stagnant in their capabilities. We're wanting to empower them and encourage them in growth personally and from a professional perspective.
Yeah, and it gives them a purpose, which is fantastic. And so Meredith, you have you've gotten to know some really talented people through your work. And what I wanted to ask you, what are a couple of tips you could give to IT managers when they work with high performing neurodiverse talent?
I think one of the considerations that's really important that isn't often considered or thought about is that for somebody who's high performing, and what do we mean by that? But somebody who's, hyper focused a lot of the time, they're, producing high outcomes, they're meeting their deliverables and their targets, faster than a lot of other people, and quality work as well. It's not just about the volume of work and getting through stuff fast. But one of the things that should be considered is that neurodivergent people mask. We all mask to some extent, and masking just means, pretending you're something that you're not in order to fit in. So neurodivergent people mask, their masking is more intense, and it is the major contributor to burnout. So something to consider for those high achieving neurodivergent people in your team, and there's probably more of them in your team than you realise, because not everybody knows that they're neurodivergent, or they may not have a diagnosis, or they may not disclose. But a thing to consider is, you know, the support that they may need or an adjustment. You know, like if somebody's working at 110% all day long, you know, maybe they need some downtime. You know, they don't go home and necessarily switch off like you or I might do. You know, their brain might still be going, or they're getting into their home pet project and creating something in a different space.
Yeah.
But considering what their support needs might be, you know, do they need some downtime, you know, or a day off, or encouraged to use their non-working time in a way that helps them to maintain good mental health and well-being, so that they're not, and other things is to being aware of creating inclusive environments so that people can unmask and be themselves, because we want people to thrive where they are and being themselves, and therefore reducing burnout or the potential for burnout. So that's something that I think, you know, you make the assumption that because somebody's working hard and they're, you know, producing all these deliverables, we just assume that everything else is going okay. And so just to be aware that, you know, they might need some support in other areas.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. And I think it's really about that, also about that awareness of managers, awareness of neurodiversity, of autism. And when Meredith and you and your team go into companies and run these autism awareness training sessions, what I always find amazing is that actually employees coming forward and talking to their managers and then disclosing that they are autistic or they are neurodivergent, but they never felt comfortable disclosing it. So it's really about having that environment where you feel comfortable to disclose to your manager that you are neurodivergent and you might need some adjustment, and you don't have to mask any longer. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
I think there's a counterpoint to that though as well, which I think is very important to understand, that this is completely normal.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I get very sort of, Meredith, I think you know this. So when you come into my world, you are an engineer. Now, it doesn't matter what you are. You come to work and you're an engineer, and everyone around you an engineer. And in that workplace, everyone has personality and differences. And some of those differences are visual, they're physical. Some of them are mental. And you're right, it's not a universal spectrum that everyone sits on. It is multidimensional. But I think the other thing for me is I feel self-conscious about people being identified as that. I want them to be identified as an engineer and someone that works for BUPA and someone who's an individual. Now, the fact that there's support systems in place, I have people with brain injuries at work. Okay, now they have support systems in place because they've lost executive function because of motorbike crashes and things like that. But they're primarily they are David. Primarily they work as an engineer.
Correct.
Now, there's a fact that there's a support structure in place is not the reserve of neurodivergent employees. It's actually for everybody. And for me, I like to have that below the waterline when I'm running my organisation. But when we have these conversations, clearly it's this is what we're focused on at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that we talk about as well. We don't want people to be shouting, you know, if they choose not to, but obviously it's not there to point out, hey, I'm the, you know, neurodivergent person in the team. No. It's, you know, yes, to be known as by their name is preferable, and not because they're the person that, you know, comes from Auticon.
Yeah.
That's right. And so, David, just a question for you. You know, when you look ahead, when you look into the future, how would you see that neurodiversity, you know, is shaping the future of work and innovation, you know, within your industry, within cybersecurity?
I just realized I'm on mute. Yeah.
That's okay.
I think I'm going to answer that question in a different way. One thing Pat said early on today is actually resonate with me very well. It's about our workforce, right, need to reflect the society, right? Like it's not about meeting some strange quota or KPIs at work, right? I think that's just wrong, right? And I think the people need to change is actually our current industry. It's like our workforce, our corporate, right? Are we willing to start making changes, right, to bring in more different type of talents and skill sets into the industry? Or are we ready to change or even dropping the traditional interview methods, right?
Yes.
So we can actually bring in more talents from neurodivergent talent into our industry. And from that, right, like I believe something good will come out of it, right? And there will be more spark, there will be more innovations, right? And then I'm actually very looking forward to that.
Yeah. And it's a good point.
Yes, so that's kind of like my answer to your questions in a slightly different way.
It's a good point that you've made, David, because you know, how do you attract neurodivergent talent? You know, what is the recruitment process does not work for many of our candidates, and that's why our recruitment process is very different. For example, we don't have interviews. They're called, you know, we do informal chats.
Yes.
And you know, we do an assessment center where, you know, you can show what you can do. It's not about looking at a resume, and if you don't have a university degree, you're dismissed. That's not in our case. And maybe Meredith, you can, if you would like to talk a little bit on the recruitment side, that we, you know, how we operate.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, our recruitment process is quite comprehensive, but also we move away from standard processes and challenge some of the standard process of recruitment. So for instance, providing questions in advance is a really helpful support strategy for neurodivergent people and for anybody. And does it hurt to have the questions that you're going to ask, you know, to share those in advance? Also, you know, for us, yes, we do an informal chat because, you know what, some people are really skilled at putting together a fantastic looking resume, but some people may not be really skilled at putting together a really fantastic looking resume, or may not be as skilled to sell themselves in a face-to-face interview. You know, their eye contact might be different. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, we need to challenge our expectations. So, you know, some of those things that we do are different. We do an informal chat with our technical director and with myself so we can explore somebody's skill sets. You know, like, tell me about what you're passionate about. You know, like what's the thing that's going to get you out of bed every day and you're going to love turning up to day in, day out. You know, a lot of the education system doesn't really work for a lot of our autistic people and neurodivergent people. They drop out of school, they're sitting at home, they've been programming since they were 9, for example, but they don't have a formal qualification. So we explore the skill sets rather than what's the formal piece of qualification. Show me your portfolio, you know, where's your GitHub link for all of the stuff that you've been doing and the passion, you know, that gaming club that you're part of, that all of those stats that you've got. And you know, we had a young guy, couldn't get a job, you know, but he did this, his area of passion was his particular gaming, and he group and he managed it and he got the data from it and he stuck it into spreadsheets and he produced this stuff and had all of their outcomes. And they're great. I love the passion, and has been a really successful outcome. Was placed with a client, you know, and he, in his instance, dropped out of university because it wasn't suitable. So there's a whole bunch of talent sitting there, but they don't meet the algorithms in your recruitment processes, perhaps.
And
then
I think
yeah.
I was going to say, because I think, Meredith, I have, so I'll share something. In my family, my brother left school at 15 with no qualifications, no high school certificate, nothing. And he's a barrister. He doesn't fit the standard education pattern. Mm-hmm. He didn't go to university until he was in his 30s. And I think when we recruit, there is a bent towards very traditional things. When I first met with a couple of candidates at Auticon at BUPA, and I think you thought I'd kidnapped them, but I actually took them up to level 13. And I was having a conversation with them in the engineering space, and they were just telling me about work they've been doing on security tools, the tasks they were doing in an informal way with no eye contact, side by side while we're walking along. And that's where you get the information. And I've sat there with some of my leadership team when I've had to put them into interview scenarios, and they've given the worst interviews on earth. And I'm sat there going, I am sat opposite one of the best cloud engineers and leaders I've met in my career, and you could not interview to save your life. You're dreadful at interviews, but I know you're talented. And I think as we face a talent shortage, I think we have to look at the limitations in our recruitment processes, because people that are good at interviews and good at telling stories get through the door, and the talent, which is rubbish at marketing and bad at selling themselves and are humble and modest and capable, won't go through that process. And that's where I think we have to be very astute and sort of smart about how we go about identifying talent broadly. Like it's a challenge across the board, that one.
It's not a we don't want organizations to be creating parallel universes, one for neurodivergent. We're talking about having an inclusive and accessible process for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a great final word, Meredith. We're running out of time. I can see Alana tipping on my shoulder virtually. Thank you so much, David, Patrick, and Meredith, for your insights. I'm now handing over to Alana, and I believe there are also some questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was an amazing presentation. And I do have some very interesting questions that have come up. One, actually, to Meredith and Ivonne, there are some people online that identify as neurodivergent. They're wanting to know how they could reach out to Auticon to get some advice and support in their careers.
Yep. So the easiest way is just to drop us an email at recruitment@auticon.com. And we will respond to them, and we can probably provide that information later so that people don't have to try and remember and write it down. But if they'd just like to reach out to us, and then, we'll make contact with them and have a conversation about what they might be looking for. Obviously, autistic people have talent in a whole range of areas. We just happen to be an IT services organisation, so we're looking at those that have skill sets in those areas. As Ivonne mentioned earlier, cyber, data, quality, testing, and so forth. But
data analytics, data
analytics
range, yeah.
Do you have any top-level advice for those on board about the recruitment process and finding businesses that are inclusive?
In terms of changing recruitment practices, so do you mean?
No, as far as the candidate coming forward, yes. Given that not all organisations uptake these ideas to change the recruitment process, is there a top 2 or 3 hints that you could give people that they might be able to navigate?
Look, it's very challenging because some organisations, stick to traditional processes. Disclosure is something we could talk about for a long period of time, and people may not choose to disclose as well. And it's always risky because there's fear of, I guess, discrimination. I think, there's opportunity to, I guess, reach out to other organisations that may provide some coaching and in that kind of space. Patrick talked about it, being able to help out a family friend with practicing interview questions, for example. So, but some of the tools that we use for our team members is like the STAR approach, in terms of practicing answering for questions. What's the situation, the task, the action, and the result, for example, is a tool. But yeah, Patrick, you want to add to that?
So, pragmatically, what I've seen work in the broader context is advocacy. So what I mean is, if you have an advocate or someone can work alongside you, so if there's people on this call in the industry that could act as an advocate for people that are autistic, for example, I've worked to actually approach people and do the disclosure. And I've said this in the preamble, there's never going to be a HR professional or a recruiter that you would want to work for that would say no. If someone said no, you shouldn't be working for them. If someone advocates on your behalf, because it's hard for you to do it, and I've done this for people, and you have the conversation is there is a candidate, and this is a situation, and this is a reality, and this is how we can approach this. Can we do this? I've seen that open doors for people more often than it's closed them. Okay, at a ratio of about 4 to 1. I think that's something that people can do for other people as a community. That's important, and that advocacy is not. It's not sympathy. It's not victim. It's just pragmatism. This is the situation. To put them into a process could, this is and that's something that I've seen really work. And I'm just sharing that because, yeah, there's a gentleman he's 22, and I've done that for him 3 times. And yeah, we've had conversations with different people, and it's worked.
Excellent. So to you, Patrick and David, there's a question about once some of the adjustments have been made, are there some advice about managing performance once those sorts of adjustments have been included, and how to approach those performance management discussions in a constructive and respectful way?
I can quickly share some insights. All right. I think the word performance management sounds pretty heavy, by the way. I just thought I could talk about that, right? I guess it's more about I think it's more about how do you provide the directions, right? And also how do you providing feedback, right? What I learned, right, is we need to be very articulate. We need to be very specific. Right. In terms of if you want to give a task, right, you need to be able to clearly articulate to understanding the why, right, and also clearly to articulate the outcome you're after. And sometimes I think it's human nature, right? Sometimes we will consciously say things, right, to make sure that we're not accidentally hurt their feelings or anything. I think with neurodivergent talent, it's actually different. They want to hear it, so they understand. And don't be surprised, they will also ask you something very I got surprised a few times, right? I think I shared that some of my own story with Ivonne in the past, right? I was like, well, I just didn't see that coming, right? That's a bit awfully bit personal, right? But again, right, I think it's more about, right, to establish that trust, right, but give clear articulations, directions, and also the insight on the why, and also the outcome you want to achieve. And if it did not meet your expectations, right, talk about in details what are the things are meeting your expectations.
I think and I think just to build on that as well, there's 2 things. I think for anyone on the call, or the culture in my work is that you manage expectation and performance in every single one-on-one that you have with someone, and that you have a one-on-one with someone every single week. So 52 weeks of the year, minus holidays, you're having an incremental conversation around expectation, performance, and how they're doing. So for me, the performance management conversation is the same for everybody. It's in small increments in terms of expectation, support. The biggest challenges that I face with all staff is either typically managing burnout and fatigue. That's what affects performance. The specification of the work is pretty straightforward. And for me, it's no different for an Auticon member of staff than it is for any other contractor or any other member of staff in terms of those conversations. You're just having a conversation with someone about the work that they do. They're doing engineering work like the other engineers. They do the same activity. They have self-awareness. So it's very, and to your point, Meredith, we're not looking at creating 2 parallel universes here. They're very normal, and the practice of continuous conversation, just like minuting meetings and having agendas, is just very good management and good practice.
So we have had a question about ADHD. Obviously, there's a lot of comorbidities with people that are neurodivergent. Is there any advice about working with this particular set of people or characteristics?
Yeah, so look, ADHD is actually a really common co-occurring condition for people on the spectrum, and I think the stats are about 70% of people with autism also have ADHD. Thinking about ADHD though specifically, you know, some of the strategies, there's a lot of overlap. So a lot of the strategies that work for people on the autism spectrum also work for those with ADHD. But thinking about one of the common elements is getting into flow state, you know, deep levels of concentration and being focused. But again, you know, and not interrupting that person when they're in flow state, because it can, you know, suddenly shock them out of flow state. But look, it's really about the individual as well. So, you know, at this 40-foot level and trying to answer a question in the chat, you know, there would be specific strategies, some of which would be similar for other neurodivergent conditions as well. So, you know, I'd be happy to have a chat if that person wanted to make them known to me separately, to have a conversation with them about that.
Yeah, and I should say that as a follow-up, we will be sending out Autocon's contact details for those that are interested in learning more about their service and what they've got to offer. I might just finish with a bit of a strange question, which I think is probably just going to be a yes or no answer. But the question is, looking at a character with quite severe autism, such as Dustin Hoffman's Rain Man, are we suggesting that they could have, someone like that could have a regular job?
I love this question, actually. It's you know, well, first of all, the character in Rain Man is so many characteristics rolled into one fictitious person, but it's about meeting the needs of the person where they're at. So for an organisation like Auticon, obviously, and most corporates, I think the question they need to answer is where do you draw the line in the sand for how much support can be provided for that individual within the context of your organisation? So that's an answer for each and every organisation to answer. We've moved past, in the old days, in the 70s, you know, we had things that were called, you know, like sheltered workshops. They're not called that anymore. They're a different model. But there is opportunity, I think, for employers to think about how they can provide opportunities. You know, I've got two sons. Both have a diagnosis. One is fully employed, one is not employed, but could be employed. I feel, you know, and has done plenty of volunteer work and trials and those kinds of things, but hasn't been able to find an organisation that's prepared to support him enough. I think, you know, some people may be able to do smaller amounts of work. I guess in a, you know, what is a regular job? What do you mean by that? But Patrick, you've got your hand raised there. I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I have an adjacent perspective as well, which is that the gentleman in the film Rain Man was based on an American called David Peake. And David Peake's career was underemployment for somebody who was extremely clever. He was self-conscious and he felt undervalued. After being exposed through Rain Man, his self-confidence changed and he changed as a person. And the point is, and I have, again, in my organization, I have people that have suffered life-changing injuries that come back to work. I have one gentleman that's come back half a day a week after a brain injury. And and what will happen is when you employ people, especially from this cohort, it will change them. So Rain Man would be a different person if you employed him. He would change. Because when you put someone into a social context and they're in a normalized environment, they respond to that environment. When people are treated equally, they feel normal. They have self-confidence. It builds slowly. This isn't a road to Damascus event. And that's why I think for us, it's actually beholden on us as a community to be aware of that we can impact and change that. And over years and time, you know, this will become more normal. And if you can see it, you can be it. Right. So as that happens and you see role models, there'll be people at Auticon who are employed from 5 years ago that will be working with people that are new on their journey. And you create this, you create and change the culture of the workforce. So I think 100% that person could have a very successful career. I'd employ them tomorrow. And they'd be a different person after working there for a year and 5 years than the person that they were when they turned up.
David, any thoughts on that questions or final thoughts before we close off?
I'm trying very hard not to cough at the moment. Sorry.
How about you, Ivonne? Any last thoughts before we close off the webinar?
You're on mute, Ivonne.
Well, I think we're all on the same, page that, diversity is so important, and it's a benefit to businesses, and it's for everyone to embrace. And we need to talk more about neurodiversity. We need to change the way we recruit to embrace neurodiversity and to give people a chance, because they're out there. There's fantastic potential out there, and at the moment we're missing out as businesses. Thank you, Lana.
Yeah, thank you so much. And as I said, we will be sending a follow-up email if you want to reach out to Ivonne or Meredith at Auticon. Thank you so much for this, and I wish you a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.